We're either live or we aren't.
So Richard, how long have you been doing this show?
This one's been, what, 4 or 5 years, but I've been involved for what, 14, 15 years. This is the Independent Producers Organization live showcase. And today we have the co-petitioners, chief petitioners for the, oh, you've got my sheet here, for the Portland Public Water District. And this, of course, has been the, shall we say, the hot item on the voting, on the ballot on May 20th. I've had some questions that people kept asking, when is that? So finally I got it. It's May 20th, and so it'll go into May. Vote yes on Measure 26, 156. Okay, on my right is Floyd Jones, the first one of the co-chief petitioners. It's almost hard to say that. And to her right, Kent Crayford. And so I'm going to kind of let you tell a little bit about your interest in it, because I know yours has really gone way back. I mean, we go back to Hands Around the Reservoirs, 10, 11, 12 years ago.
Yes.
Good, trying to protect our water. That's really what it is.
Well, that is how I got involved. The city made a line item decision to demolish the reservoirs up at Mount Tabor and replace them with underground storage. So I'm one of the co-founders of Friends of the Reservoirs, and we got involved behind that issue to protect our drinking water system and to protect our grand open reservoirs. At the same time that was going on, the city was also involved in discussions related to relinquishing Portland's sole ownership of our Bull Run system. And that would have diminished Portland's control of our drinking water. So we got involved in that issue, and the city was also discussing building a chemical filtration plant at Powell Butte, which would have allowed blending of our water with the Willamette River water or Columbia River water. So there were a lot of big issues back in 2002. And Friends of the Reservoirs, myself personally, I've been involved in every major issue related to our drinking water system for the last 12 years. And there have been many opportunities to save money along the way, and the city hasn't taken advantage of those.
Right. I would certainly think that that they just didn't need to have the city get involved like they were. That's I mean, it's funny though. I think the Water Bureau, the way it was going, was just fine until they started losing sight of whatever it is.
Yeah, and the Water Bureau really did take us down the wrong path, because they actually sent a consultant back to DC to help craft this EPA regulation that wasn't based on sound science, and that's what got the ball rolling on this idea that they could proceed with burying our reservoirs. But you know, to move on to this issue, we've been working with City Council for many years. I served on the Water Bureau Budget Committee. I think I'll let Kent give his introduction.
Okay, yeah,
his
about
background.
time anyway.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Yeah, well, I also served on the Water Bureau Budget Committee. I've served on the BES Budget Committee. That's the bureau that oversees the sewer system in Portland.
Okay.
And, you know, we've witnessed firsthand through the years many poor decisions. There's been a lot of mismanagement. A lot of City Hall political staffers moving into six-figure positions in the utilities when they don't have any experience, any utility experience. That's led to even further bad decisions. They've spent a lot of water and sewer money on things that have little or
Right.
nothing to do with the water and sewer system. As you know, Floy and I are involved in an independent lawsuit on that issue, calling the city on the carpet for spending water and sewer funds illegally. The expenditures in that lawsuit now total $127 million, and that's helped drive Portland's rates sky high. We have the third highest sewer rates in the nation among the 50 largest cities. We have higher water rates than Phoenix, Arizona. And if Commissioner Fish gets his way, the head of the Water and Sewer Bureaus, he's going to raise water rates another 55% over the next 5 years. So we've got to do something. It's time for ratepayers to take matters into their own hands, and that's why Floy and I put forward this ballot initiative to convert the utilities into a public utility district and get the professional politicians from City Hall out of our water system.
I was curious about some more of the items that got to this, 127 million. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, there's that house out there, there's the work down at the waterfront, and there's more than that.
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
able to itemize some of them?
Sure, absolutely. Well, you mentioned a couple. The city has spent $1.2 million in water and sewer funds on politicians' election campaigns. The city has spent water and sewer funds subsidizing light rail downtown. And you know, I support light rail personally, but I don't support spending money from our water and sewer bills on it. They've spent tens of millions of dollars now on lawyers and studies for the Portland Harbor Superfund, and yet the Sewer Bureau CEO said just 2 weeks ago that those expenditures probably have nothing to do with the sewer system, and yet they've already spent $52 million from ratepayers' pockets on that.
So we weren't involved. We should not be involved in the Superfund as far as the water bill is
Well,
concerned. There must be
Portland
some-
should be involved, and you know, that is an expenditure that Portland should make, but that expenditure should be borne by property taxpayers and business income taxpayers, not by ratepayers. So, you know, currently you may have a family of 4 living in a starter home, you know, and their cost share for that project is more than a guy living in a $1 million Pearl District penthouse condo. And that's not right. Those costs are being disproportionately borne by those who can least afford it. And that's an incredibly regressive way to spread those costs.
Okay.
And some of the other projects that you
Yeah,
may or may
so-
not be familiar with is they built a campground out in Clackamas County.
Okay.
And again, that doesn't have anything to do with our water service. There's a lot of land acquisitions.
Okay.
Those are the more expensive projects. But, you know, there are very small projects too, like they funded a play up at the zoo. I mean, you know, things that are rather bizarre and, you know, just should never be
They
considered.
just kind of see the money there and say, let's just do this.
That's right. Nick Fish and Randy Leonard and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
politicians at City Hall have used our water and sewer funds as a honeypot for a lot of their pet projects. And that's why, you know, in this measure, we say we need to end the pet projects, and this measure will do that. And you know, we don't necessarily pass judgment on the merit of the projects themselves. It may be, you know, the play up at the zoo may have been, you know, a great thing to support, but it shouldn't be coming out of our water and sewer bills. It has nothing to do with water and sewer.
Okay. It's just one more thing that causes them to kind of creeping up, and they say they're short so much money, and then that's when they start asking for.
Well, we've not seen that they've been short. I mean, I think Kent mentioned they've got them 166%. And a big bulk of those increases started in about 2008, where they rose 17.9, then 12.0, and 12.8. And, you know, two really current examples of spending excessively involve both bureaus spending on their own facilities. The Water Bureau is constructing a new facility for themselves, a new office building. for maintenance and construction over at Interstate.
Yeah.
And they're building it at Pearl District pricing, $45
Okay.
million. And then maybe you want to mention the
Sure.
sewer building.
I mean, just another example. The City Sewer Bureau just built a new office building for its engineers, 38 engineers.
Okay.
The original budget for that building was $3.4 million. The final cost came to $11.4 million. It was 300% over budget. And that came out to about $300,000 per engineer. So it's a tremendous waste. The cost of the building is $991 per square foot. It's astronomical. And so at a time when Portland homeowners and renters are struggling to keep up with their water and sewer bills, the bills keep rising and rising. City Hall just keeps throwing more and more money at these lavish projects, and it's time for somebody to say, hey, enough is enough.
We have so much perfectness when it comes to water. We have the Bull Run, and I don't even know what other people do. I think they get them out of rivers and stuff like that.
Sure.
Bull Run is just so perfect, and we shouldn't be ending up with something costing so much money.
That's right.
Now, I know that the big pipe, sometimes these things are going to come along. And I'm not sure how much that really affects the sewer amount. I think it's the extra things that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, the big pipe is certainly a large driver of our capital spending, and it's a large driver of rates, but it's not the only driver.
Okay.
We are paying for that project over 20 years, so it's spaced out, and we're servicing that debt every year. But there's money well above and beyond that debt service that we're spending money on. That's unnecessary, a lot of it. Just to give you an example, up until last year, the Water Bureau was fully funding 51 vacant positions. So these are positions that hadn't been filled. There was no person there to fill that job, and yet the Water Bureau was getting money for those positions and then just siphoning that money back into a slush fund, basically, that they could use at their discretion. That's just wrong. It's bad public policy, it's bad utility management, and those are the kinds of practices that need to stop.
Is that type of thing available for the public to examine or to look
Well, unfortunately, only through public records requests. They're not very forthcoming with that kind of information. Floyd, is more familiar with that situation.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I spend many hours every month trying to get public records from the Water Bureau. They've been stonewalling a request that I've had in since November. But we learned of this funding of the 51 positions, not in the Budget Advisory Committee meetings, which, as I say, I've attended for 9 years, but it actually was revealed at council. But that is just one example, and what was revealed this year is that their manager to staffing ratio is, they have 33 positions where they're only supervising 3 staff. So it's exponentially higher than other bureaus. And you just wouldn't find that in efficiently run PUDs. One of the major problems is that we have this unique commission form of government.
Yeah.
And so then you end up with the czar in charge instead
Right.
of a full board of people who are focused solely on water and sewer. And that's what you're going to find in the 30 largest cities throughout the United States, is you're going to find a board overseeing water and sewer, not a czar in charge.
Okay. I think 51 people, that's a lot of people to not having accomplished anything.
They're ghosts. They don't exist. Those people, those are empty desks.
Work not done?
Work not done. Sometimes they're positions that are just superfluous. And yet they were fully funding those positions,
Yeah.
and so that money goes right back into their budget, and they use it for other things. It's time for reform.
Okay.
There's been some really bad practices, and it all stems from the top. Fish stinks from the head.
Yeah.
And that's our problem here. Our problem isn't with the line workers in these utilities. In fact, you know, those people are doing their jobs, and most of the time they're doing them well. And we actually get a lot of anonymous tips from those people about a lot of the waste and abuse within the utilities. Where we have concerns is with the upper management and then with the decision makers at the top, in this case, the commissioner in charge and the city council.
Would this be taken away from fish?
It would be, yes.
Okay, so
There's been I think, a misunderstanding that this would create a new separate entity. That's not the case. What would happen is that the city council would simply slide aside and the new water board would slide in.
okay,
So the bureaus or the utilities underneath them would all stay the same. All the same workers, all the same employment contracts, same vendor contracts, none of those things change. Just the governance at the top would change.
okay. You know, I almost feel like I have to jump around to a thing or two. I still look at this thing as, why aren't the reservoirs up there being used? Why was that taken away? Why do they have to feel that they have to create? Now, I could understand a big backup reservoir up there. If you really, maybe even you might feel it was important to have, but to not use these reservoirs down here, I've been reading about the cost of what that's going to be. How they tear them out?
Well, for the last 26 years, our water demand in Portland has declined, continually declined every single year.
Really?
So we have an excessive amount of storage already. So there was no need to build another tank.
Okay.
The reservoirs at Mount Tabor were fully adequate to provide the needed supply. Unfortunately, there was this poorly crafted regulation, and the Water Bureau was involved in crafting that. They sent the consultant back to DC to craft it. But if we had good leadership, strong leadership here in Portland, we could still retain those reservoirs, just as Rochester, New York has done.
Right,
Because in
right.
2011, thanks to the City of New York, Senator Schumer, and the Mayor of New York, the EPA agreed to review and revise this EPA regulation known as LT2. And so Rochester isn't spending a dime on treating or covering their historic reservoirs that are set in city parks. Not a dime. If they had to do anything, they were going to add additional treatment, and it would have been at a fraction of the cost that Portland is spending. So now what's happened is we've built this tank up on Powell Butte that we don't need,
Yeah.
50 million gallons. We spent nearly 3 times as much as Seattle on that size tank, nearly $137 million. And Coin 6 did an investigation here in the last month or two and found that it's leaking 280,000 gallons a day. So we've just spent this tremendous amount of money on storage we don't need, and it's leaking.
How could we not see that kind of a leak, I wonder?
Oh, they see it.
They see it multiple cracks all throughout the reservoir.
It's got hundreds of cracks in it, and that's the problem when you have Water Bureau management that don't have any experience in utility management. The gentleman who heads the Water Bureau's capital construction program, who oversees these $100 million projects, was a political staffer in City Hall. He never had any utility experience before he went to the Portland Water Bureau, and yet he is overseeing these $100 million projects. Well, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so what happens in that situation is you have problems. These projects have problems. As Floyd mentioned, this $137 million tank is now leaking 280,000 gallons a day. That's enough water to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 48 hours. That's how much water is leaking out of this tank.
I don't see how the people that constructed it, that poured the concrete or the cement, how could they make that kind of mistakes?
Well, we're not getting all the information. That's part of the problem. The Water Bureau shut down after Coin started that investigation, so we're not getting a lot of information to know the details. But one comment that was out there in her report is it was suggested that it was a poor design. And this tank was designed by that very same consultant who went back to DC in the late 90s and early 2000s and was involved in crafting this rule. We've talked about this many times on your show and in forums in the community. And he's been on retainer since 1994. You know, he moved from MWH
It's 20
Global
years.
yes,
Yeah.
to CH2M Hill,
right.
and now we're stuck with this tank. But yes, we need an open system where the public can access this information easily.
Yeah.
And that just
Okay.
isn't the situation.
And that leads to another important feature of the water district, and that is we have very strict conflict of interest provisions in the measure.
Okay.
Currently, we talked about the cronyism that's rampant in Portland's water and sewer utilities and this revolving door between the utilities and City Hall. Another problem we have is that people who get money from the water and sewer budgets also serve on the budget committees that make the decisions or advise the city council on where that money is spent.
All right.
It's a terrible conflict of interest. You've got
Okay.
the foxes watching the hen house.
That's right.
What the measure will do is it stops that. It puts a stop to this revolving door. It puts a stop to the conflict of interest, and it requires those who have a financial relationship with the city or a financial relationship with the water and sewer bureaus, it requires them to have a cooling off period before they could run for the district board. Just like members
Okay.
of Congress, before they can go back and lobby their colleagues on Capitol Hill, they have a cooling off period. And that's important because you want to prevent those financial conflicts of interest among decision makers.
I wanted to ask, really the question is how busy will this board be? In other words, do they take up X amount of hours during the week? Is it a full-time job to be on the board? Is it?
Well, I
what's
think
your
they're going to be
guess?
very busy
At
for
least
sure.
At the start.
Yeah, at least in the beginning. There's so many problems in these utilities that need to be grappled with. They need new management. They need their expenditures need to be put under tighter controls. They need to have some independent financial oversight. One of the provisions of the measure is to require an annual independent financial audit. Currently,
Okay.
these two utilities that bring in almost $500 million a year from ratepayers like us do not have a financial audit.
Yeah,
And that's just a malpractice.
that's right.
We really need to know where the money's going, what it's being spent on. The measure requires that.
Yes, we should tell you that it's modeled after Eugene's Water and Electric
Okay.
Board. And they too have an elected board that's unpaid.
I want to stop you on that. If you have people working week after week, don't they need to be paid something or?
Well, we didn't want this to be viewed as a political stepping stone.
Yeah,
So
right.
in some senses, we wanted to make it unattractive, and we wanted to make sure that people were really interested in these issues and
Okay.
running for this board. It works really well in Eugene. I don't
I see.
anticipate that people will be working full-time week after week,
All right.
after the initial,
Okay.
year perhaps. But
Okay, so the main thing, you want them to be really interested in what they're doing, trying to correct the water bureau situation.
well, absolutely. I mean, we've never had a city commissioner run for office and with the idea that they would be the commissioner for water and sewer services.
Okay,
And anyone running for these, for this board, that's going to be their focus. They're going to have to say what it is that they care about, how they're going to address the ratepayer concerns, how they're going to protect Bull Run. They're going to have to run on a campaign related to water and sewer issues.
will they be replacing fish?
Yes, so yes,
okay.
that's right.
Yeah, it's time to
or
get fish out
Nick
of our
Fish.
water. Yeah.
I have to say his first name for also,
Yeah.
I guess. Okay, so I kind of interjected that to ask a little bit more about the board, and I think you've answered that.
And it is elected by zones. People should know that. There will
Okay.
be 7 zones. It covers the entire city. There is some misinformation out there that we are not serving the entire city, that we are disenfranchising East Portland. That is not the case. Once this passes in May, then it'll be the responsibility of City Council working with the Population Center at PSU to establish equal size zones that include East Portland. So, you know, there will have to be some adjustment to the Portland Public School District to move the boundaries out as you move out east
Okay,
to make sure that we're
okay.
covering the whole city, but they have to be equal in size in terms of population.
So
And then there'll be another election in November to vote for board members.
Yeah, that's an important point. The city council, the Portland City Council, will draw the first map for this district.
Oh, okay.
So if anyone's going to disenfranchise anyone through the drawing of the map,
Okay.
it will be the city council who will be disenfranchising them. So we are hoping that when the measure passes, the city council will do right by the voters, respect the intent of the petitioners and the intent of the voters who passed this measure, and draw a good map, a straightforward map of districts that isn't gerrymandered, but is
Yeah.
simple and straightforward, respects communities of interest, and then puts that forward to the ballot for people to run for the district
Okay.
positions.
Okay. Some of these main things that we had been trying to accomplish, will this be a priority to try to bring the reservoirs back into use and to stop this thing about covering them? That's a big thing, a big question.
Well, I certainly hope we have opportunity to do that. The Water Bureau currently has plans to proceed with disconnection up at Tabor in October.
Yeah.
And the board won't be in place by then. The EPA is scheduled to complete their revision of the rule in 2016. So really what our leadership right now at City Hall should be doing is going down and speaking with the governor.
That's right.
We asked Mayor Hales to do that. When he was first elected, he did invite us down to City Hall, Kent's group. I was invited, Regna Merritt, who was a 20-year director with Oregon Wild and now is with Physicians for Social Responsibility. A lot of the businesses were there. And the mayor was meeting with the governor the next week. And we all said to him, you need to ask the governor for relief. It's a pretty simple thing.
That's right.
And he did not do that.
I see. So that's one of the things that you're going to try to do or would like to do?
Well,
Or?
we hope that that's what the board members will do. I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
that's something that people will have to question them on when they're running for this office. They'll have to put that out there as part of their platform.
That's what they have to agree to go after.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So they come down with decisions equal to what? There's somebody in charge of the Water Bureau now, or the commissioners now, or their decisions, they reflect the entire board. Is that right? Do you follow me?
Currently, you mean?
Yeah. No, when it's in place. When it's in place. In other words, I'm trying to visualize, was it 7 people?
Yes.
Okay, 7 people coming up with one or more directives that they want accomplished. They agree on them.
Yeah.
And forward the.
Yes, this will be in public meetings.
Okay.
They'll have to follow
Okay.
all public meeting laws.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit kind of like the school district, Portland Public Schools. Those guys, I don't think they're paid. And
Well, that's
it's,
right. That's right. They're volunteers, and
Yeah,
I don't think there will be any shortage of people who are qualified or willing to
good.
run for these positions. I think what you've seen just through this campaign is that Portlanders care a lot about their water system. They're energized about it. They're willing to put time and energy into fighting for it, and we expect that to lead to very good candidates, a lot of candidates, hopefully.
Okay. I'm going to kind of go sideways here and ask you about, shall we say, the negatives or the people that are against the water board, how you would deal with them, how you reply to them. In particular, something comes to mind is the environmental people are acting like they're going to lose all kinds of money because they were getting it out of the slush fund from the city, from the Water Bureau, and now they won't if there's a board, something like that.
Well, several of those people that oppose are sewer contractors. I mean, Bob Salinger with Autobahn received a $43,000 contract to count birds at Mount Tabor and other areas in the city, and that was a sewer contract. And you know, I'm a bird watcher. I'm a a birder.
Okay.
And a Mount Tabor resident.
And a Mount Tabor resident, and you know, I mean, that's a fine thing to do. But I mean, Audubon has a nationally has a $45 million budget, and they
Okay.
ought to be able to afford to pay for bird counts without ratepayers having to pay for that.
Okay, so
And then, you know, some of the other groups like DPAVE, they also have a city contract. And I should mention that Bob Salinger served on the BES budget committee at the same time he received this contract, and that's really unethical. And that's the case with the Water Bureau as well. There is someone serving on the Water Bureau budget committee now,
Okay.
and his clinic has received $60,000 a year for the last 5 years. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the money being dispersed to that clinic, but he really shouldn't be sitting on the budget committee. There are conflicts of interest there.
Yeah, yeah, and these might not be legal conflicts, but they do raise questions, you know, and that's one of the things that the Water District measure does, is it puts these strict conflict of interest provisions in here.
okay. Almost seems like it would be good to have a documentary on ethics and that kind of thing, just
good idea.
just to kind of get people back on the right track.
And
for
in
a
terms,
while.
yeah, and in terms of protections, I mean, it was really important to us to make sure that we put in some protections for Bull Run. So there's some really good provisions that are not in our city charter right now. There is no provision that prohibits privatization, and that had been a real concern 10 years ago when CH2M Hill, you know, was holding conferences, work sessions on privatizing, and the debt has really escalated tremendously over the last 10 years. So we put that in, that will be in the city charter when this passes. There are also, it enshrines protections for Bull Run against logging and entry that are currently only in city code. So those would be in the city charter. And then it prohibits commingling our water with other sources like the Willamette and Columbia. I mean, we do
Yeah,
use the
yes.
Columbia South Shore Wellfield, and of course we would continue to use
That's
that. But
a
it
good thing.
prohibits other commingling.
Right. And it's a little known fact that Portland was this close to actually turning over the management or the control of our water system to its suburbs. In fact, 12 years ago, Commissioner Eric Sten had a plan to regionalize the Bull Run system and take it out of Portland's sole control and devolve that control to the suburbs. Portland would be have one seat at the table, and it would function essentially like Metro does. But why would we want to do that when we currently have Portland has sole control, and we've had sole control of the Bull Run for 125 years.
Right.
We as Portlanders don't want to change that. I think that's something that we have a right to be selfish about. And so the measure specifically prohibits regionalizing the Bull Run system. As long as this measure passes, that will be enshrined in the charter, and the Bull Run will always belong to Portland and Portland only.
Okay, well, that's good. I know one thing, I was just thinking about the Columbia, the water. Yeah, I've been out there and gone through that. They have a bicycle ride.
Oh, good.
And very informative, and seeing that and knowing that that is there when it's needed. Or maybe there's some, what is it, when the Bull Run gets
turbidity,
that's it.
yes,
And they use it then. I thought that is so neat to have a backup system just like that. So it's really
Yeah, we've
to be
already
appreciated.
put money into it. I mean, there are some concerns, and an earthquake is located in a liquefaction zone, so it's likely not going to be there in an earthquake. But we've already put a lot of money into that backup system, so we don't need any other additional storage. I mean, we have the backup, we have
Okay.
adequate storage at Mount Tabor and adequate storage over at Washington Park. So we're pretty set on storage, but yet the Water Bureau is expanding, even though we don't need to be expanding.
Okay, this the water coming from the Willamette. That I didn't even know that was a thought by some. You're saying it.
No, it was a serious consideration, and it still remains, you know, in their regional planning and transmission
Okay.
storage document. No one's ever said, we're done with this, we will never do this. I mean, it's still out there. No one's moving
okay.
forward to do it at present, but this would prohibit that.
Okay. Okay. I just because I guess that bothers me. I don't. Those other people at Wilsonville, they do it. And
Right. Yeah.
I just.
And without a vote,
I wonder.
without a vote of the
I have a
people.
feeling those people are spending a lot of money on little water bottles, such as
Well,
that.
their
I
water
just-
certainly can't taste as good as ours, and you know, so long as if this measure passes, we will not be drinking out of the Willamette River.
Okay. Okay. No, that's good. I just. Okay, then, what's there? What about, shall we say, some of the large contributors that are involved? Are there's, shall we say, static that you're getting because some of the people that are really interested in changing the water or having their water bills cut down because they use so much? Can you elaborate on that and how that?
well, we're really grateful that the large customers have contributed. You might remember, you know, 10 or 12 years ago, Friends of the Reservoirs actually brought initiatives like this out there. And, you know, we knocked on doors, everyone signs them, but if you don't have some financial support, you just cannot get on the ballot. And these same large water customers, they're the people who've come out when we've had council hearings on, you know, forcing a treatment plant or, you know, burying the reservoirs or these escalation of rates. They've come out every time we've called them to show up at council. We have a long list of folks who've signed on to our letters, including the environmental groups, you know,
Okay.
Coalition for a Livable Future and all these other organizations. But the people who have actually shown up at council have been the large water customers. So, you know, I really think the criticism is unwarranted. And, you know, we can make the same kinds of arguments, and we haven't gone that way, but you can make the same kind of arguments on the other side.
Yeah,
I mean,
going the other way.
well, 96% of those supporting the opposition, you have sewer contractors, you now have big monopolies, PGE. Why are they involved in this? PGE, Pacific Core. You know, why are these electric utilities involved in water?
Do they use a lot of water?
No.
No, the reason that they're opposed to a public water district is because they feel that it'll be a slippery slope. That once Portland establishes a public utility district for water, that they could be next. And but that's not what this measure is about. This measure has nothing to do with electricity. But
Right.
you know, you get a group of you know, corporate board in a boardroom, and they get all worried about something coming up on the ballot, and they get fearful, and so they decide to throw some money to stop it. Well, that's a knee-jerk kind of attitude, and it's disappointing. But you know, that's unfortunately how politics works in Portland.
Yeah. That's right. I just so again, some of these that are really the big users. How do you reply to the people that are the heavy users
Yeah.
that are
Well,
so interested?
one thing that is a little known fact is that in Portland we have a flat rate base, so everybody pays the same rate for their water.
Okay.
So you and Floy and I all pay the same volumetric rate that a restaurant pays or that a large manufacturer
Yeah,
might pay.
right.
So we all pay the same rate. So when the rates go up, you know, we're all hurt. So just like a rising tide lifts all boats, a lowering tide, strands all boats. So these large water customers have seen their rates going up and up and up, and it's making their businesses less competitive. So when they have to compete against a business in Vancouver or a business in Chicago or a business somewhere else in the world, their costs are going up at a higher rate than they can raise their prices or otherwise compensate. So, as Floy said, a lot of these companies have come out year after year to support water advocates in trying to reform Portland's water utility. They've been the ones that have been, at the table, and they've worked very cooperatively for many years with ratepayer advocates. So we're grateful for their support. We really are, and they they're simply suffering from the same kind of rate shock that most Portlanders are suffering from.
And one of the fear-based strategies that the opposition has used is to suggest that if this board were in place, then they would work to lower rates only for large water users and raise rates for individuals. Well, the Water Bureau actually put out a proposal to do that a couple of years ago. They wanted to switch they wanted to go to a cost of service model.
Okay.
And we just don't think that a board of the people is going to will go that route.
Okay.
So those are just fear-mongering tactics that are used to support the status quo, and that that helps the political elite. It helps those people get sewer contracts. It helps whoever benefits from the status quo, but it doesn't help the majority of Portlanders.
Yeah.
No, that's right. Well, I've seen some of these articles. You could see I brought up another one. An independent water sewer district isn't the answer.
Yeah.
Is that something
let's speak to that. So what you're speaking about is the City Club report, which opposed an independent water district. The op-ed that you mentioned that criticized the water district was authored by a gentleman named Chris Little, who is an executive with Portland General Electric.
Okay.
He chaired the City Club Study Committee, and his employer, Portland General Electric, made clear to us before that committee was even formed that they would oppose the measure. And then a few weeks later, he's appointed the chair of this supposedly neutral committee. That committee also had sewer contractors on it. It had a prominent City Hall lobbyist. It had a woman whose academic program is underwritten by the Water Bureau. So again, this wasn't a neutral board of independent observers. This was a board of foxes consulting on henhouse design.
Right.
And they were explaining to the hens, how we should design the henhouse security. Well, don't trust the foxes, if you want to secure your henhouse. City Club. I think it's got a storied history, but unfortunately, it's really packed with City Hall insiders now who are defending the status quo. And what they're saying is, if status quo is good, vote no for status quo.
And they've offered no solution either. What they propose is to allow Nick Fish to appoint a committee of politicos again. We already have that. The Budget Committee is filled with political appointees. The PERB is filled with political appointees. And so they're suggesting that Nick Fish, who's been responsible, he was behind the Rose Festival deal. He played a big role in the Riverview Cemetery deal. So they're proposing that he appoint a committee. Well, that hasn't worked thus far. It's not a real solution.
Yeah, you're familiar with the TriMet, all the TriMet problems, I imagine.
Oh, I use TriMet.
Oh, you do? Okay, yeah.
About once a week.
So you're familiar with the cuts to service and
I read about it more than I did before.
Right, and they've had all sorts of budget problems. Well, that stems from problems with their governance, with the governance of political appointees.
Okay.
Well, what the City Club is proposing is a TriMet-like board for water.
Okay.
Well, we can all see how well the political appointees have managed TriMet. We don't want a group of political appointees managing our water system.
Okay.
It's a terrible idea. It goes in the opposite direction. What we need is real reform. We've got too much politics in our water system. The answer isn't more politicians, more political appointees. The answer is to get the politicians and the political appointees out and instead set up an independent board of directly elected citizens.
You know, I have to speak almost for myself when I see this stuff happening, and this is going on here, and this is going on here. You just feel helpless sometimes. You feel, I got to do this over here, or I got to pay attention over here.
But that's what's so great is that we finally have an opportunity to take matters into our own hands
I
as
like that.
ratepayers. We have a vote now. We get to vote on this
Okay.
issue on May 20th. We get to vote for change. We get to vote for reform. This is something that Floyd and I have worked for 12 years. We were working in City Hall. We were in the system. We did it their way. It didn't produce anything. It didn't produce any results. The more things change in City Hall, the more they stay the same. Charlie Hales committed in his campaign to lower water and sewer rates. One of the first things he did once he was elected was break that promise. He raised water and sewer rates. This year he's going to raise them again.
7%.
Him
more-
or Fish?
Well, the
Nick
mayor's
Fish,
budget,
yes, it
Nick
is-
Fish proposes the budget, but then the mayor takes the budget and puts his own name on it. So the mayor will put forward a budget with higher water and sewer rates,
What
breaking
items-
his campaign promise again.
What items do you think he's basing this increase on? There must be something.
Well, you know, Randy Leonard got started on, you know, let's build as many projects as we possibly can. Projects that should have been spread out if they needed to be built at all over a 20 or 25-year period, and he condensed them into a very short period
Okay.
of time. And then, you know, with water demand declining, then, you know, they raise your rates for that. And, you know, there are probably many things in these budgets that we don't know about since there haven't been any financial audits at
And
all.
you're right. You've been unable to get the information you
That's
want.
right.
Exactly. And then you have someone like Nick Fish who's disinterested. I mean, he did not even show up for the rate hearing last year. And then he was appointed Commissioner of Water and Sewer. You know, and you know, the budget committee process this year was very condensed. You know,
Okay.
so really nothing has changed. I mean, the Randy Leonard's cronies are still running the Water Bureau.
Okay.
He had opportunity to change that, to bring in new leadership. He didn't. You know, he had opportunity to actually, you know, bring someone in to do a financial audit, you know, and show that things were going to be different. He didn't do that. So,
I know
And
when
now-
I read your stuff.
Right. And now what he's saying, it just came out yesterday, that Commissioner Fish and Mayor Hales are saying if you oppose the water district measure, voters, and it fails on May 20th, we will set up a blue ribbon panel of political appointees to give us a report on how to fix our water and sewer systems. Well, I'll just tell you, the political appointees are the ones that have wrecked our water and sewer systems.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are responsible for skyrocketing rates. And you don't ask the arsonist to come put out the fire. You know, they're not, the people that broke our system are not the ones who are going to fix it. So, you know, we'd like to ask voters, don't buy more empty promises from Mayor Hales and Commissioner Fish. It's time to vote for real reform, and that's why we need to pass this measure and get a public water district.
yeah, so people should go to waterreform.org if they
Okay.
want more information, if they want lawn signs, if they want to contribute, if
okay.
they want to just give us a call and come out to other forums as well.
Yep, that's right. And that's posted on the website too.
Yes.
Because it's true. I want to go over and make clear on some of the items in the about about 7 minutes that we have left. Make sure that their viewers are clear on what we're doing. And one is, again, one of the things you're trying to do is bring back fill the reservoirs, use the reservoirs at Mount Tabor again, and not cover them. And
Yeah, well, that'll be up to the board
Okay,
to push
okay.
forward, and we're hoping that a new board will put some renewed energy and fight the good fight on the reservoirs. Mayor Hales is waving the white flag. He's capitulated. He's given up. He wasn't even willing to talk to the governor about it. You know, as Floyd mentioned earlier, New York City has gotten a reprieve. Portland didn't. New York City was led by Mayor Michael Bloomberg and Senator Chuck Schumer. They went right to the top. They went right to the White House to appeal
Yeah,
to preserve
okay.
their open reservoir. Charlie Hales shrugs, waves the white flag,
Okay.
and gives up. So the difference is we have the same opportunity. The problem is New York has strong leadership, Portland has weak leadership. So
That's-
we need to solve our
we know
leadership
that.
problem. When we get a new board, and if we all do our jobs and ensure that good
That's
people
right.
run for this board, and we have vigorous campaigns for the water district where all these issues are vetted and we have a lot of constructive debate and dialogue about the importance of preserving our reservoirs, we're confident that you know, those new board members will take the fight back to Salem and try and save our reservoirs. The EPA is conducting a review of the LT2 rule that governs the open reservoirs right now.
Ah,
that
okay.
rule is scheduled to be revised in 2016. There may be a light at the end of the tunnel.
For us.
Yes.
Okay.
The problem is, you know, the situation we're in is we still need to run to the light. We need to keep walking through the tunnel. Mayor Hales has decided to just lay down on the tracks and let the tunnel collapse on him. You know, that's unfortunate.
It just almost terrified me when I read in the paper about all the stuff they're going to do at Mount Tabor to have it like a staging area. And that's how my impression.
Yeah, no, they're scheduled to cut
Everything.
down many trees. It's really just going to be quite
I just-
quite a nightmare, and it really just isn't good for our system to
Just-
eliminate the reservoirs. But you know, people
Just-
need to be active. They need to come
That's
out
right,
and vote.
right.
This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to, you know, reform our water and sewer bureaus.
Okay, that's what I know I'm after. It's you've been doing this, working so hard on this for so long. I've been reading her emails all time after time. You put in so much effort doing that. I mean, sometimes I write an email and it's 1 or 2 sentences. You write these things or fully explain everything. Just super. I don't know how else to
But
how
City
to say it.
Hall isn't listening.
That's
It's
right.
the problem.
That's
City
right.
Hall isn't listening. I mean, really, we just need to
Yeah.
get the politicians out of our water and sewer bureaus and get people who are truly interested in these issues to serve on the board.
That's right. And speaking of that, is there? You said Eugene was doing so well with this.
So they've had a water and electric board for 100 years.
Is there a way to let more people know up here about how well that's?
Yeah.
And their water rates are 36% lower than ours. Now, obviously, water systems are different, but
Yeah.
that's the case throughout the country. And PUDs are generally more efficient, better run
Yeah.
than.
And certainly better run than the czar in charge form of utility management that Portland has, which no other major city has.
Yeah.
It's a broken governance model that we have here.
To have such high water bills and along with, in comparison to other people, you'd think these people that are taking, I don't know where else everybody else is getting their water. I mean, they're draining aquifers where there's no replacement.
Right,
But
or-
then that's somewhere else. We
Yeah.
are so fortunate. We need to take care of what we have.
We do. I mean, that's where the focus really needs to be, is on system maintenance and not on expansion.
Right.
Yeah. You know, Eugene has a website, of course.
Oh, okay.
It's www.eweb.org, eweb.org.
Let me have it. EWEB.
It stands for
Okay.
Eugene Water and Electric Board.
Right.
And you can go on there and find out more about their model, how their utility is managed. This measure was written by the former legislative counsel for the Oregon legislature, a gentleman named Greg Chamoff. He's probably written as many or more laws than any attorney in the state of Oregon. He modeled the Portland Public Water District after the Eugene Water Board. So it's very similar, and folks can find out more on their website. They can also see a rate comparison, how Eugene's rates and Portland's rates compare to other cities on the West Coast in the region.
Well, I'm wondering though, they don't have a big pipe. The big pipe does interfere with increase our water bill, doesn't it?
It does, but it's a myth that that's the only reason our rates are going up. The big pipe costs $1.4 billion. Well, annually between water and sewer, we take in about $500 million. So that's kind of putting those expenditures in perspective. We like we discussed earlier, a lot of debt service does go to the big pipe, but there's so many things that we're spending money on that are well above that debt service that we don't need to be spending money on. Or as Floy mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ways we could just space these expenditures out so that we lower the rate impact for homeowners and businesses.
Yeah, and of course the big pipe doesn't have anything to do with water increases. I mean, that's on the sewer side. I mean, when water rates have gone up 166%, that doesn't have, it's unrelated to the big pipe.
But people only think about their total amount of bill that they have to pay, right?
Well, that's right, yeah. And like we said, their sewer rates are the third highest in the nation among large cities, and our water rates are still higher than Phoenix, Arizona's, and yet they're rising, very quickly yet. So we're really in a crisis situation now. As Floy mentioned, our water consumption is declining. So every year we have to raise rates just to make up for the lost revenue from lower demand. That's a big problem. We're in a downward spiral, and that's an economic problem with our utilities. The only way to kind of get out of that spiral is to start to curb our costs and reform the two utilities.
Okay. Any other last comments that you want to make? Because
well, we invite people to come out and help us. This is a really
to show up
important
on
issue.
some of these things.
Absolutely.
And that's to do with your website.
Yeah, if folks go to waterreform.org, first off, you can download a quick video that talks about the measure and some of the problems that it's attempting to address. There's also a longer video on there of a forum that we did a few weeks ago.
I know it. I saw. I watched some of that.
Good.
And actually, I think I'd watched some of it before. When it was live. Well, it couldn't have been live.
Well, March 6th. It was.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But I saw it then, and then of course you were on the Examiner, front page of the Examiner.
That's right.
So none of that hurts. That's great.
And we also have a Facebook page, Richard, which folks can find us at Portlanders for Water Reform. They can go to our Facebook page. We've got the videos posted there. We've also got articles. You can also download a copy of the measure itself on our website at waterreform.org. So folks can read the text of the measure themselves. They can also download this 2-page summary of the measure and its major effects.
Okay, I want to thank my guests, Floy Jones and Kent Crayford. Sorry.
That's okay.
I know it better than that. And for coming on, the two chief co-petitioners for the Portland Public Water District, the new board that we're trying to get installed here. And
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, vote yes on May 20th. Yes.
And I'm going to ask them to put up the replay times for us now.
How about the video?
Next hour. They wanted to play the video you had.
Oh, that would be great.
We'll still do it.
Okay.
Are we good? Because I'm really ready to get some water.
You are watching the Independent Producers Organization program. This program replays on these channels, at these times, and on these days. Write it down and tell your friends.
Critics say the city has been far too reckless in recent years with its rate increases.
The sewer and water rates have been going up, and this year, the mayor wants to raise them again.
The mayor wants Portlanders to pay more for their water and sewer, but that's not what he told voters during his campaign. His voter guide clearly reads lower water and sewer rates in every Portland neighborhood. And earlier this year, listen as he pledged to stand firm against utility hikes.
Each bureau is capable of asking for a pony for Christmas, but that doesn't mean they're going to get a pony.
Portland is being sued, accused of using money illegally from water and sewer bills to pay for controversial projects.
From public restrooms known as the Portland Loos.
City of Portland is slammed in this judge's ruling for spending water and sewer funds on political elections campaigns.
It's called the Water House, and if your water comes from the city of Portland, you helped pay for it. Now, about 2 years after it was built, the city is selling it for a huge loss.
$138 million ratepayer-funded reservoir failing crack tests. And to make matters worse, the reservoir is already 4 months behind schedule.
Portland Water Users Coalition surveyed about 300 people, and I have the results of that survey right here. The majority, or about 71%, feel that city leaders have not done a good job at keeping our water and sewer rates low. So the coalition wants to take away the city's ability to set our utility rates. Instead, set up a PUD, or People's Utility District. It would be like an independent system where voters would elect board members to oversee the rates. The coalition's survey showed 58% of people agree with the idea.
People's recourse, if they don't like the way that the sewer and water systems are being managed, is at the ballot box.
We have to get rid of this act of political terrorism.
Very recently, and without any fanfare, a group of City of Portland employees moved into this brand new building with an eye-catching design and eye-catching price tag. That building is now the new home to engineers who work on Portland's sewer system.
But it was way over its original budget. The final cost comes out to $300,000 per employee who works there.
We're back, and I think we're going to have a sequence of videos. There's one to do with...
No, I don't have any videos now.
Oh.
I have one video, but it's not on this subject.
Okay, do we still have one, or was that it?
That was it.
Oh, okay, so you go ahead.
That was it, yeah. Well, that was an interesting program. I'm Jim Lockhart. I started out, when I first heard about this on Facebook, boy, I jumped for joy because I agree with a lot of what these folks were saying. That what tipped me finally was the whole thing about fluoride, where they were trying to ram this down our throats, meeting in closed doors behind closed doors with the folks who were wanting to fluoridate us without the people caring, or the people being able to voice their concerns about it.
Well, that was someone else, right? The fluoride people. That was a whole different deal.
Well, yeah, right. But that's
okay.
But the conduct of the city council,
right,
and the mayor, which was Sam Adams at the time, just pushed me over the edge. And of course, the citizens jumped up, and they stopped that from happening. And now, whether you agree with fluoride or not, the way the city council conducted it by meeting behind closed doors with the fluoride folks for months before it even leaked out. And they didn't announce it. It leaked out that they were wanting to fluoridate our water. And of course, everybody knows about that. It went on and on and on for months. And it was voted down 3-1, and as well it should have been. And it's been voted down in the past. And their conduct just pissed me off that they were trying to do this and not allowing the citizens to have a voice. And so when I heard on Facebook that they were going to take the power away from the city council and put it into a water board, I was just elated. And almost immediately somebody responded and saying that there's another side to this. And so I started reading about it and paying attention. And a few months ago I brought on Travis Williams, who is executive director of Willamette Riverkeeper. Folks want to go to youtube.com/philosopherseed and scroll down there. You can find that show. And he enumerates a lot of good reasons why this is not such a good idea. And his perspective was that a lot of these things that the city council has been doing over the years that are not very cool, according to the folks that were just here, are small potatoes. Well, I can't agree to that. There's some real issues with how they conducted themselves. But the question is this a viable alternative? The water initiative, like there is now a Portland water. There's another initiative, I'll remember the name in a minute, another initiative being gathering signatures right now, and it's going to be something on down the road. I just had a little talk with Kent and Floy, and I'm hopefully on my weekly show, that's every Friday night at 7 o'clock, we're going to bring both sides in, get Bob Salinger that they mentioned, and from the Audubon Society, maybe get Travis Williams back on, and we'll try to get some folks to go back and forth, because I think that's the only way that people are going to really be able to have a feeling for which way to go on this, because we really do need some reform. There's no doubt on my mind that we need reform, and then the city council and the mayor have really been shabby, I think, on a lot of the water issues, and I guess Nick Fish included. But I printed something you wanted to interject here?
No, the mayor, they pointed out how the mayor was a problem, and
sure,
to do nothing. White flags.
And had a chance to stop the reservoirs from being covered up, and he didn't do it.
All he had to do was say, I don't want to do it. That's all he had to do. I mean, instead of just kind of letting it go. No. Need to do something.
Yeah,
need to be positive about it.
Yeah, I'd like to have seen those reservoirs, because, you know, Scott Fitzgerald has been on this program and other programs talking about how they could get a waiver, and they won't do it. And even if it's a temporary waiver, you know, to was it 2016? Something was going to be changed. I mean, that would maybe make it so we didn't have to do it. But anyway, I got on there's a website called Stop Bull Run Takeover. I don't know why they would call it that, but they called it that. And they're the folks who are organizing to be and are against this. I didn't grab all my paperwork here, unfortunately. They're the ones that are organizing against this particular thing, and I'm gonna tell you why here. This is by Bob Salinger, who they mentioned, the Audubon Society.
Yeah.
I better get my glasses on here, even though I did print it up pretty high.
I didn't realize that he got so much money from
the
city.
You know, but that doesn't really mean that that there's going to be some issues with the environmental services just because a couple of people are involved in it might have been getting some money from them. It doesn't mean that necessarily that the board that it will be elected would cut some of those environmental services. It doesn't really pencil out that way. The Portland Water District Initiative would transfer control of more than $15 billion in public assets, including control of our precious Bull Run, to a new, unproven board with no water or sewer experience. Maybe so, maybe not, we don't know, depends on who they are, and susceptible to corporate influence. Bizarre conflict of interest provisions would eliminate tens of thousands of Portlanders from serving on the new board. But notably, the initiative does nothing to limit the influence of regulated corporate entities and industrial polluters. A lot of these folks, these corporate entities and industrial polluters, are the ones that are giving all their money to these folks, whereas the folks from the Bull Run, Stop Bull Run takeover, those folks don't have a whole lot of money. It's all a bunch of small donations. A judge has already ruled that the manner in which the new districts were mapped by the initiative backers would exclude East Portland, 20% of the city's population, from voting for water district board members, even though they would still have to pay water and sewer bills. That's another thing. Gresham can't vote. There's a lot of people out there that weren't able to vote against or for fluoride. They're also not going to be able to vote in this because they're outside the Portland city limits, even though they get the water. Which, you know, that to me is enough not to make this work, because people, you know, I believe in democracy. I don't believe in partial democracy. Anyway, the backers of this initiative would like the public to believe that this initiative is a populist revolt. It is nothing of the sort. And, you know, they made a really good case, and, you know, they convinced me that there's a lot of need for reform, like I said. But is this a populist revolt? I'm sure that Floyd believes so, and maybe Kent does too as well. But these folks are saying it is nothing of the sort. Leadership behind this initiative includes a lawyer who led the fight against campaign finance reform in Oregon and the executive director of Industrial Water Users Coalition. More than 90% of the funding raised to date came from 5 large corporate entities, with $55,000 coming from Superfund polluter Siltronic and another $50,000 coming from forest clear-cutting baron Harry Merlot. Less than 1% of the funding came from grassroots contributors of under $100. Not a single community group has endorsed the initiative since the day it was announced more than 6 months ago. Not a single community group. But all the business groups are behind this. Of course, they're paying a lot of money for water. People backing this initiative are the last people we should be trusting to remake our government. This initiative is underpinned by a strong anti-environmental agenda. The backers of this initiative has also sued the city, arguing at its core environmental programs, including tree planting, Superfund cleanup, and watershed protection programs, are all illegal. You believe they're illegal? The backers have been unsuccessful in their efforts to gut the city's environmental programs at the Portland City Council, so now they have turned to the initiative process. You have to make up your own mind on this. This is not something you're just going to, you know, read the pamphlet and decide on your own. You know, I'm sending you some homework here that you can look at both sides and make up your mind, because this is going to be some far-reaching repercussions and consequences of this.
You said something about the Superfund in there. I just want, without reading the article, the city may get Superfund money back. So for whatever that.
So the city's so they're saying the city's putting money out for the Superfund, but we may get it back.
Yeah, I think must be what it's coming. Like I say, without reading it.
That's a Tribune. Tribune's been on
March 6th.
First time I heard about this was on was a Tribune, just about.
Okay.
You know, they're really on this.
There have been some articles about this from both Floyd and Kent to do with them and their purpose.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is you know, I can't think of anything more important than this. Finally, the initiative backers have suggested that this initiative will lower rates. In fact, it does absolutely nothing to lower rates. There is not a single mention in the initiative of mechanisms that would lower rate. What it does do is explicitly eliminate all oversight by the elected city auditor. It creates a new layer of government that will have to duplicate expensive existing legal, administrative, and auditor functions. It jeopardizes the city's outstanding bond rating. It will require anybody seeking a permit for water or sewer work to seek permits from 2 different governments rather than from one. I don't think increasing bureaucracy is a good idea. The groups opposed in this measure have a long history of working with local governments when possible and challenging local governments when necessary. This initiative is not about reform. It is a cynical attempt to take over our water, sewer, and stormwater systems by a small group of self-serving corporations. Well, Bob did a good job with this, and you know, you might take exception with some of the things he said. Some of the things he said I know are fact, and it's not like all these are black and all these are white. I mean, there's good things to be said for both sides here, and it's up to the individuals to make up their mind. Like I said, go to stopbullruntakeover.org. And I actually had a printout, a whole page or more of all the organizations that were against this. And it's quite extensive. Every environmental group you can think of, Willamette Riverkeeper, Audubon Society, League of Women Voters. I mean, the list goes on, and I left it in the other room there. But you can go onto that website, Stop Bull Run Takeover, and you can click on that and read those for yourself, because this is going to be a decision that's going to affect us for a long time.
It's too bad that Bob Salinger wasn't here
able to make it
to talk to these.
Right, but I'm going to try to get Bob to sit down on my weekly show, and we also have, you know, since it's the 20th next month, we have another month.
That's right, 20th.
We have another show to do. We should maybe try to get folks on here, because originally we wanted to get both sides. We wanted to kind of advertise it, but we weren't able to get both sides on at the same time. That's right. Let alone get people on far enough in advance to be able to advertise and let folks know. I want to kind of make a little electronic town hall out of it, where people could email us in or call in. We don't have the room in the studio for an audience or anything like that, but it's pretty important. You know, we need to have the people make their case, and we need to have the people on the other side ask them questions.
Yeah,
you know, because that's when,
right.
because they were the ones that will be able to see the holes in their arguments. You know, I didn't see too many holes. I had one or two in what they were saying earlier, but I was really surprised at some of the things I heard. That yeah, you know, even though the fluorides would put me over the edge with our local government here, there's a whole lot of other things that are a problem. I wish I had that list of folks that are on board, but you know, again, I'm probably for the fourth or fifth time, I'm going to say, you know, people tuning in, believe what they said earlier, and you know, get in there and see what the opposite people say. It isn't like it's going to be the end of the world if we don't pass this thing, and like there is the Water Task Force, I think it's called. They're gathering signatures right now, and what Floyd was saying, that it's not gonna, it's gonna solve some of the issues, but it's not gonna solve a lot of the issues that they have with the city council and the mayor's office. So, you know, we're down 40 minutes left of the program. I have a video that we can play. It's not on this subject, but the one I was gonna play on this subject, I guess it kind of degraded a little bit on the video. It was about water, and the water is increasingly going to be important. I can't believe that we're paying more money for more water than in Phoenix, Arizona. Yeah. That just is astounding.
Incredible. Yeah.
You know that they're draining that Colorado River. What's making it to Mexico now is a pittance between you know, the Lake Mead and all the water that's going to Vegas and to Phoenix. You know, it's incredible that and the dams that are holding it back to make electricity for those places. And here we are paying more than that. That's terrible.
Yeah.
And as far as the thing in Eugene, I know when we were trying to pass a citizens utility board for electricity here, taking it away from PG&E. PGE.
Video's ready.
People voted it down, as I remember, and that was terrible. That was something that really could have helped, because back then we talked about the public utility board, or whatever it was called. I don't know if they call it that in Eugene. That was one of the examples, and I think it was 80% of the people in of the electricity in Washington is people's utilities, and 20% is large corporations. And it's just the opposite here. We only have, in this state, we only have like 20% of our electrical companies are publicly owned.
Well, what could PGE have been doing wrong that required even anybody to think taking over?
That's a good question.
Oh, okay.
It's been about a couple, 3 years. I don't
Okay.
don't remember what all the dynamics of that
thought
was.
they've done a pretty good job. It's just still,
Well, their rates seem to be going up every year, as is our water.
Yeah,
Didn't I
yeah.
just see it's supposed to be another 5 or 6% or something like that in a headline today as I was walking by it in Fred Meyer's? It just keeps going up, electricity. And, you know, I remember 10 years ago I was paying, I don't know, less than $100 for
Okay.
water every 3 months. Now it's $3.
right. Right.
And it's just, you know, that's crazy. That's crazy. You know, we moved to Phoenix and pay less money.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm really, really nervous that this is going to be, you know, to me, is you don't want to throw the baby out with the wash water. You don't want to get out of the frying pan into the fire. And that's what I'm afraid could be happening here. And Salinger, which this article is on the front page there of the Stop Bull Run Watershed, if folks want to just read this a little bit more. He talks a lot about all the different reasons why this is a corporate takeover. Whether or not it is, if they can make a strong enough case that it could be, better safe than sorry. We want to get all these platitudes, but it might be better safe than sorry. Perhaps this other one that people are gathering signatures for now might be a better one. I don't know. We'll have more on this. We'll do our best to have more on this next month, and maybe we'll be able to talk a little bit more about this other initiative that they're gathering signatures for, because I know that you're pretty much staunchly for this, and I'm not as staunchly against it as you are for it, but you know, I tend to...
I'm just so-so.
Yeah, so.
But
I think
they made a very good presentation.
No, they did a very good presentation, and whether or not this initiative would solve the problems or would just put us into the fire is really the question. Because there's definitely, like I said, need for reform. In so many ways, this particular city, as progressive as it's supposed to be, has a lot of politicos in these different bureaus that don't know what they're doing, and they're just collecting paychecks. And they're not BSing us there. We know that to be a fact.
You know your video's ready.
I think the video's ready. We've got 35 minutes. This was a great video I taped many years ago. I forget the guy's name, named Eric, and he's talking about global food sovereignty. And it's not water, but if there's anything as important as water, it's food. So we'll go into that. We'll just finish the show off. We'll see you next month.
Harvests and record hunger, we also had record profits last year. I'm talking about the bumper profits from the last quarter of last year of ADM, Archer Daniels Midland. 20% increases in profits. Monsanto, 45% increase in profits. Cargill, 86% increase in their profits. General Foods, 61% increase in their profits. Mosaic Fertilizer, subsidiary of Cargill, 1,700% increase in profits in the last quarter of 2008. Well, we see a dichotomy here, don't we? So some people are suffering, and others are making money off of that suffering. Now, there was a lot of talk in the media when the food crisis hit. Suddenly, we got food price inflation here. All these prices went up. People couldn't afford the food. Even here, consumers were concerned at the rise in prices. And certainly around the world, developing countries which had become dependent on the global market for their grains were having a very hard time. We're having a very hard time accessing those grains and feeding their people. And so the mainstream media basically attributed the food crisis to what I call the proximate causes. And that's what we heard about, just the proximate causes. The first one was climate. Oh dear, climate change is upon us, and look what happens. We get these big droughts in Australia. The wheat harvest fails, and now we don't have enough food to go around. There's some truth to that. There's a terrible drought in Australia. We do have climate change affecting our weather systems and our food systems, but still, we had more than enough food. A lot of talk was about the rising meat consumption in the newly emerging economies of India, China, and Brazil. How dare those middle classes attempt to consume as much beef, grain-fed beef, as people in the United States. Supposedly they were the ones causing the problem, sending the prices of grain going up because they wanted to eat too much grain-fed beef. I'll address that in a minute because it happened to be false. There was a 5% fall in cereal production in 2005-2006, but we still had more than enough food to go around. And like I'm saying, 2007 and into 2008, we had bumper harvests. The other proximate cause that there's some truth to was we had very low grain reserves. Our grain reserves were down to about 54 days worldwide.
Are you supposed to have something in back on that screen? Well, there's nothing up there.
Yeah, I know, they're working on it. The other, of course, and we're going to have to ask, and we'll answer in a minute, what happened to our grain reserves. They didn't just disappear accidentally. They were legislated out of existence. The other, of course, which everybody knew about, was the rise in oil prices when it went up over $100 a barrel. And of course, that doubles transport costs. And since so much of the food which we eat travels at least 2,000 miles, 2,000 kilometers, 1,600 miles or so, it affected the price of food. Fertilizer costs went up 3 times, which is why Mosaic Fertilizer was able to make a profit of 1,700% in the last quarter of 2008. The other proximate cause, very much linked to more structural causes, was the spread of biofuels, which I call agrofuels, because these are industrial biofuels. I'm not talking about, kitchen grease and whatnot. I'm talking about plowing under large parts of the rainforest and growing sugarcane for agrofuels, for ethanol, for export. Talking about the Midwest moving from a food to a fuel economy and shunting all of our corn into ethanol production, which of course sent up the price of corn. And finally, especially after the ethanol boom began to nudge corn prices up, and investors began to pile into the ethanol market, then we get financial speculation. Then we get Wall Street and Chicago coming in full force and pumping up the price of food with speculation, with buying through futures, in order to make profits. I mean, this is the same financial money which developed the housing bubble and was looking around for something to invest in after the bubble burst. It's the same money which, prior to that, invested in the dot-com boom. And when that burst, had to invest in housing. So we see is a series of bubbles, and in 2008, food became one of those bubbles for the financial sector. But these are still all the proximate causes. These are all the causes that we talk about if we don't know our history. And what we're not talking about are the root causes. And the root cause, the one single root cause, is that we have a vulnerable global food system in which over 90% of the cropland is devoted to 5 crops: cotton, maize, wheat, rice, and soy. And most of these crops are grown in the global north and exported around the world. We overproduce in this country, pumping our cropland full of water, full of fertilizer, full of pesticides, so that it produces more than the land actually has to give. And then the surplus of that overproduction, which we can't possibly consume here, we ship out around the world. But since there are farmers all over the world, the first thing we have to do is destroy their markets so that we can sell our grain to those countries. And I'll explain how that happened in just a minute. But what that means is that we have a food system which is highly vulnerable to both environmental shock and economic shock. Because it's dependent on such a small range of crops and controlled by a handful of monopolies that there's no way that the food system can possibly attain any level of stability. So it's highly vulnerable to shock. And the other root cause is what I call the industrial agri-foods complex. These were the giant oligopolies, the grain traders and the processors, the seed and genetic engineering companies, and the giant retail and distributing companies that control the food system. These are the ones who profit. These are the ones who hold back the grain, as Archer Daniels Midland did in Mexico, causing the tortilla crisis. And then when the price of grain goes up, then they begin to sell. These are the hoarders. These are the ones who also diversify their assets and pump the price of grain up through the financial markets. These are the ones who take most of the food dollar. You know, 50, 60 years ago, farmers used to get about 60% of the food dollar, up to 70% of the food dollar. Now they get 15, if they're lucky, 18% of the food dollar. And with that, they have to pay for the production costs. You know, where does it go? Farmers produce, and they don't know who eats their food. Consumers eat the food, and they don't know where it came from. Why? Because it's obscured by the agri-foods industrial complex, which takes the largest share of the food dollar. And it's a big dollar. $6 trillion a year. Food is a big business. So how did we get this industrial agri-food complex? Where did it come from? I mean, one can go historically back into the roots of colonialism and from Jefferson on, etc. But and based on slavery and the piracy of the early pirates, as Buckminster Fuller used to call them, went around the world stealing the seeds on the U.S. cavalry, which cleaned the American West of its indigenous people so the United States could expand. But let's start with the Green Revolution. Let's not go that far back. Let's start with the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution started in the 1960s and 70s. If you're not familiar with it, it was basically a campaign to export industrial agriculture from the industrial north, from the United States, into the global south, into what we then called the Third World, and then later we called them the developing countries. And this was initially financed by the Ford and Rockefeller foundations. And one of the men that they hired, one of the researchers they hired, was Norman Borlaug. And Norman Borlaug found that if we went around the world and stole seeds from farmers, and then made crosses, hybrids, of the best seeds, searching for the particular characteristics that you were looking for, that you could produce what we then were then called high-yielding varieties, HYVs. And they did yield a lot more, 20, 30, 40% more than the traditional seeds that they had been drawn from. But they only yield higher if you put on all of the fertilizer, all of the water, all of the pesticides, and use the machinery in order to make them yield more. If you don't do those things, they don't yield more. So what did this do? We set up 13 international agricultural research stations funded by countries of the global north through quotas in order to develop these seeds all around the world in what's called the Centers of Genetic Diversity, the Vavilov Centers of Genetic Diversity. So obviously they went to Mesoamerica, which is the home of corn. And they went to the Philippines, which is the home of rice. And when they first arrived in the Philippines in the 1960s, the Philippines farmers were planting nearly 2,000 varieties of rice. It's not unusual for one single small farmer to have 20 or 30 varieties growing on a small plot of land at the same time. I'll fast forward very quickly for you. If you can find 3 varieties of rice in the Philippines today, you'd be lucky. They're gone. They've been stolen. They sit in a huge seed bank in the Philippines, controlled by the International Institute for Rice Research. But the farmers don't have those seeds anymore. This happened all around the world. And the other thing that happened was, as these seeds were given out. First of all, to buy the seeds, you needed money. So you had to get credit. You could only get the credit if you had something for collateral, like land. So the Green Revolution immediately favored landed farmers. Those small farmers, the billion farmers of the world who didn't have land rights, didn't have immediate access to these seeds. Then you had to buy the fertilizers, the pesticides, and use the machinery. And then you got a big crop. So what happened in the first instance of the Green Revolution was that the smallholders around the world, who really fed the world up until that point, were pushed off their land by the larger farmers, who had financing, who had seeds, who had the backing of the governments, and who had all of the encouragement from the United States, of course. These farmers then migrated, on one hand, to the hillsides, the fragile hillsides of the tropics, to the forested frontiers of the rainforests. They chopped down trees looking for nutrients so they could grow their basic grains. And they migrated to the cities, where they formed a huge reserve army of labor for the factories, for manufacturing, for industry. But that's also where we got the city's slums. If you read a very interesting book by Mike Davis called Planet of Slums, he tracks this. Basically, we are now a planet of slums. Most of the world's urban population lives in slums. And this is when it first began to happen, with the Green Revolution. But as a result, there was a tremendous amount of production of food. Because on one hand, you have the farmers on the hillsides, and farmers accessing the nutrients from the rainforest. So you have extra production there because you've increased the land base. And on the other hand, you have this intensified production in the lowland, in the bottomlands, where larger farmers are using these high-yielding varieties with all of the benefits of the inputs and the investment and the credit. The second, and during that period, what happened was that farmers around the world became dependent on the inputs coming out of the global north, the fertilizers, the seeds, pesticides, machinery. So it really was colonization of the global south by agro-industry from the global north. Tremendously successful in that regard, and also we got a flush of production, which then brought the price of food down. And there was a trend in these low food prices for 30 years. The next step in the rise of the industrial agri-foods complex were these structural adjustment policies of the 1980s and the 1990s. Now, these are the policies imposed by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund on countries in the global south who are defaulting on their debts. I'm not going to get into the causes of the debt crisis, but it's safe to say that we had a debt crisis in this country as well, just like the one in the global south. And that debt crisis in the 70s was with our farm sector. And we lost half of our farmers in this country during the debt crisis. And that's when we had Earl Butz, Secretary of Agriculture, say, get big or get out. So everybody tried to get big, and they pushed off half of the farmers out. And they all defaulted on their debts, and they were all given, the larger farmers, and they were all given extensions. They were all bailed out. Some of us here helped to bail them out, those who were paying taxes at the time. In the global south, they weren't so lucky. Because as the prices for their products, which they had been overproducing, sank, the banks in the north decided to call back their loans. And the global south couldn't pay. And that's when you get the third world debt crisis. So the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank step in to save the day. And they extend loans to the governments of the global south on some very interesting conditions. First condition, these countries had to remove all of their tariff barriers. Second condition, they had to sell off all of their state-owned enterprises. Third condition, they had to dismantle their marketing boards. Fourth condition, they had to dismantle their grain reserves. Fifth condition, they had to move into export crops, luxury export crops. So in other words, they had to dismantle their food system in order to allow for the colonization of that food system by the companies of the global north. Those were the conditions if they wanted money in order to pay off the debts which they had incurred during what were called the development decades of the 60s and 70s. And the third step in establishing the dominance of the industrial agri-food complex over our food systems in the world is the free trade mania, which took hold from the 1980s right on into the present. We're still in it. In which the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, is turned into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And we get the free trade agreements like NAFTA and CAFTA. And what these agreements do, essentially, is to cement into law, by cementing into international treaty, the structural adjustment programs applied by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. The G8 countries run the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The G8 countries run the WTO. The United States runs NAFTA. It's important to realize that these institutions, particularly let's take the World Bank, their mission is to end poverty worldwide. That's a great mission, right? On board with that mission. But what they don't talk about is their job. Their job is to resolve the crises of capital in favor of the G8. The directors of the World Bank sit around twice a week and play poker. You take this project, you give me that project, you can have that market, but I'll take this market. No, I'll up you that market over there. They're using the economies of the third world, and they're using development, they're using tax dollars. By the way, the 10,000 people who work for the World Bank don't pay any taxes. They're using that to advance the interests of the G8. And what are the interests of the G8? Well, I think it's pretty clear. In the case of food, the interests of the G8 are the interests of the industrial agri-foods complex. And so now we have treaties, international treaties, that oblige states in the global south to permit the dumping of subsidized products from the global north into their local markets. So farmers, let me take that back, not farmers, because farmers don't export grain. Archer Daniel Midland, Cargill, Dreyfus, Bunge, these giant companies, they export grain. So these companies are able to dump grain into the global south and sell it at under the cost of production. And that puts all the farmers in the global south out of business and makes them dependent on the grain produced in the United States. Now, it's not like farmers here get a good deal out of it. Most farmers one talks to don't really want these subsidies at all. They'd rather just get a fair price for their grain. Just pay me a fair price. They don't get a fair price. Why don't they get a fair price? Because if they were to get a fair price, if the government, for example, was to go back to the policies of the 1930s and 40s and say, no, this is the price for grain. This is what's going to cover the cost of production and cover the environmental and social externalities, then ADM, Cargill, Bunge, Dreyfus would have to pay 3 or 4 or 5 times more for their grain. So they don't want that. So we have to make it up by paying for the subsidies. And they get the grain on the cheap, and they go down and destroy the markets in the global south and create dependency on the global market for these countries' food security. So what are the results? Building up 50 years of building this industrial agri-foods complex. Maybe you don't know that in the 1970s, the global south was not only self-sufficient in food, because we're taught that they're always hungry and they need us. In fact, they were self-sufficient in food in the 1970s before all this happened. In fact, they even used to export a surplus of $1 billion a year. Not a tremendous amount by global standards, but nothing to be ashamed of. Now they import $11 billion a year in food. Industrial agriculture, which was really a rather small sector of agriculture 50 years ago, which had its niche here in the United States and in parts of Europe, now is dominant and produces 20% of the world's greenhouse gases because it's so inefficient, it's so dirty. It also uses up 80% of the world's available water. And it's contributed to the loss of 75% of the crop diversity in the world. In other words, we've lost 75% of our crop diversity thanks to the monopolization of these seeds, thanks to the concentration of the control of seeds in a few companies. This is extremely dangerous. This is the type of loss of diversity which created things like the potato famine in Ireland. We need diversity in order to deal with all of the unpredictability that nature throws at us, and now, with climate change, is going to be that much worse. After 20 years of trade liberalization, sub-Saharan Africa has probably lost about $300 billion, something close to $300 billion, because they're on the wrong end of the global trading stick. They lost that much revenue as a result of global trading. This has been calculated by Oxfam. That's about what we pay to sub-Saharan Africa in foreign aid. So, wouldn't it have been better just to let them produce their own food? Here in the United States, something like 1.3 million Mexican campesinos and campesinas, smallholders, farmers, went bankrupt as a result of NAFTA. And we got millions of immigrants coming into the United States. The other day I was talking to a farmer in California, and he was lamenting the fact that he was getting old. And he said, there's no farmers to take over the land anymore. My kids don't want to work anymore. What are we going to do? There's no more farmers. And I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry that the kids didn't want to take over the land. I knew why. They couldn't make a good living at it. But he didn't look around him. If he'd looked at his workers, they were Mexican farmers before they came to be his workers. If he looked at the restaurant chefs, they were all Mexican farmers before they came up here to work for a lousy wage. There are farmers all over this country. Just got to open your eyes and find them. They're there. And there are millions of young people who would love to get into farming. They're all there. I should say that the Green Revolution, aside from allowing the agribusiness to expand over the rest of the world, that it was very lucrative for the U.S. I mean, it was couched as it was sold as a way of solving the problems of hunger around the world. We give them better seeds, they're going to raise more food, and we're going to solve hunger. In fact, Norman Borlaug got the Nobel Prize because they said he saved 1 billion people from starvation. In fact, in the U.S. corn and soy production, the seed companies benefited by about $10 billion a year by stealing the seeds from the Global South, patenting them as hybrids, and then selling them back to the rest of the world. The farmers who for 6 millennia have developed those seeds never saw a penny. And then of course we have the rise of the giant monopolies, the oligopolies, ADM, Cargill, and Bunge that now control 80% of the world's grain. Monsanto that controls 1/5 of the world's seeds. And who laugh at antitrust laws. Fining them $100 million is just the cost of doing business. What this all boils down to is what I call the corporate food regime. This concept was advanced by a researcher named Harriet Friedman from the University of Toronto, who helped to start the Toronto Food Policy Council, something else I'm going to talk about. But she basically says that a food regime is a rule-governed structure of production and consumption of food on a world scale. And she looks at this historically to see that we've gone through a couple of different food regimes. And then Phil McMichael from Cornell University says that today what we have is the corporate food regime, which is based on fossil fuels, dominated by the global monopolies, and characterized, among other things, by the supermarket revolution, and what are called global animal protein chains and genetically modified seeds. And they're controlled by the industrial agri-foods complex. The regime is controlled by the industrial agri-foods complex, the big monopolies, with the help of the World Bank, the IMF, the USDA, USAID, the World Food Program, and now big philanthropy. These are the institutions of the food regime that make the rules that govern our food. Now, food regime, how does one manage a food regime like this? And to understand it, I think we have to recognize first, this is a capitalist food regime. So then we have to look at what are the different phases that capitalism goes through. And Karl Polanyi, who was one of the great thinkers and students of capitalism, who studied capitalism and how it worked, who followed Karl Marx and others, and followed David Ricardo and followed Adam Smith, who were all trying to understand capitalism. Karl Polanyi said that, in fact, capitalism always goes through two different periods, if you look through history. It goes through what's called a liberalization period, which is characterized by unregulated markets and sort of breathtaking capital expansion, followed by devastating busts. And then it has to go through a reformist period, in which markets, supply, and consumption are all regulated in an effort to restabilize the regime. And it goes back and forth. Liberalization, reform, liberalization, reform. So, if you look at the 1929 crash and depression, that was following a period of liberalization. Then we get the crash. Then we get the New Deal, and we have a whole period of reform. And then Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan get into office, and we move very quickly into another period of liberalization, which we call neoliberalization now. And that's where we are. We're in a period of intense neoliberalization. And that's the same is true for the corporate food regime. The corporate food regime has gone through phases of liberalization and reform. And it's in a period of neoliberalization now. And I've already named all of their main institutions. Right? Their orientation is corporate. The discourse is food enterprise. And their approach to the food crisis is very telling. The food crisis hits. We know why it hits. And they say, we can solve it. The architects of the food crisis, in other words, like calling an arsonist to put out the fire. The arsonists come and say, we can put out the fire, and we're going to put it out with more liberalization, more free markets, fewer grain reserves, and more technology. Another green revolution. This one based on genetically modified organisms. And they have a guiding document. It's the World Bank's 2008 Development Report on Agriculture. The bank hadn't spoken a word about agriculture for over 20 years. They'd ignored agriculture. But that's their guiding report now. There's also a reformist current, if not a full-fledged trend, within the food regime. It's always there. It's just that at any given time, either the neoliberal trend will be dominant or the reformist trend will be dominant, just like capitalism. The reformist trend, I have to say, is just as meek and weak in the food regime as it is in our government in general. You see, the difficulty of the Obama administration to keep from falling into Afghanistan, the difficulty of the Obama administration in attempting to extricate itself from Iraq, the difficulty that Obama has in passing the meekest of healthcare reform programs. And you realize that the reformists are not very strong within capitalism, and they're not very strong within the food regime. The reformists in the food regime talk about mainstreaming the good things that we like fair trade coffee, organic agriculture, finding ways so that the corporate agri-food system can incorporate some of these good things, reforming them a bit, not doing away with them, not putting something separate in their place, but trying to make them a little nicer. They also depend on the World Development Report for Agriculture. And their approach to the food crisis was basically the same, except they said, well, we need more safety nets and we need more food aid. Right? And we need a little bit more flexibility in letting countries protect their agriculture. But that was it. They weren't really interested in changing things. So I probably got you all depressed. It depresses me. It depresses the hell out of me. I have to study this stuff every day. And I have to write about it, and then sleep well at night so I can go at it again the next day. The good news is that in response to the corporate food regime, we have the rise of the food movements. And then we have the rise of food movements around the world. And you know what I'm talking about. The CSAs, the farmers' markets, the local food policy councils, the MST, the Landless Workers Movement in Brazil, the Via Campesina, which is the International Peasant Federation, right? Movements all over Europe trying to, let's call it breaking through the asphalt, trying to green urban areas with food, right? Community gardens, farm-to-school programs, the calls by the National Family Farm Coalition and Via Campesina to take agriculture out of the WTO, to reestablish grain reserves. Grain reserves are very important, not just to have food during difficult times, but the grain reserves regulate the price of grain. Because if the price of grain goes up, you let some grain out of the grain reserve into the market, bring the price down. If the price goes down too far, you buy up some of the grain, brings the price back up, store the grain in the reserve. It's a great way of maintaining a stable price, which is what farmers need, rather than subsidies. Calling for a floor price so that the cost of production, including the environmental externalities, are reflected in the price of the product. These things are happening all over the world. Literally thousands and thousands of organizations working on these issues. And millions of people. Sustainable agriculture, organic agriculture. There was a study done not long ago by the University of Michigan which asked the question, can sustainable agriculture feed the world? And they looked at studies all over the world comparing sustainable to conventional agriculture, and what they came up